Just your question.
Minister, this relates to the informal meeting of the EU Defence Ministers in Bratislava at the end of September. A meeting which took place obviously around quite a flurry, I suppose, of NATO-related activity. And obviously there was a statement issued after that which talked about accelerated practical cooperation between the EU and NATO. I'm wondering what stance you took in those gatherings, given that we're supposed to be a neutral country.
Minister, 2 minutes.
I asked the House previously, the Dáil and the Government. Business precluded my attendance at the attendance in the informal meeting of the EU Defence Ministers in Bratislava, which took place on the 26th of September 2016. The Secretary-General of the Department of Defence represented myself as Minister for Defence at the meeting. The ministerial informal included a working session which focused on EU-NATO cooperation and in particular the ongoing work to present concrete options for implementation of the joint EU-NATO declaration signed in July 2016. The Secretary-General of NATO, Mr Jens Stoltenberg, attended the session. The declaration highlights 7 key areas where the EU and NATO can further strengthen cooperation and include countering hybrid threats, broadening cooperation in maritime security and migration, expanding cooperation on cyber defence, developing coherent and complementary and interoperable defence capabilities, facilitating a stronger defence industry and defence research, setting up coordination on exercise and supporting countries in building their defence security capabilities. They represent practical areas of cooperation in support of international peace and security, international crisis management operations and the protection of civilians. Progress on developing a set of proposals in these key areas, which will be agreed by the EU and NATO Councils, was discussed during the session also. The HRVP, Federica Mogherini, and the Secretary-General of NATO will report to the respective councils in December on options to implement the EU-NATO declaration for their consideration. Importantly for Ireland, the EU-NATO declaration confirms that future cooperation will fully respect the decision-making autonomy of both organisations and will not prejudice the specific character of the security and defence policy of any member state. In conclusion, as this is already embodied in the declaration, there was no requirement at the recent informal ministerial meeting for the Secretary-General in the Defence to raise the issue of Ireland's neutrality not being compromised by the EU-NATO cooperation. Officials in my department will continue to monitor closely proposals that emerge under the key areas I mentioned previously in my reply.
In fairness, the Minister and his department have a very fluid interpretation of neutrality. Basically, sort of whatever NATO wants, NATO gets. It's a little bit Irish, actually, in terms of what other people would understand the definition of neutrality to be. And I'm wondering, is the Minister concerned, for example, at the fact that we had a NATO warship in Cork Harbour at the weekend, manned by Dutch soldiers, armed with high-velocity rifles, a vehicle or a warship that was in the process of being refuelled? Is this acceptable practice for NATO warships now to be refuelled in Ireland while on an operational work? Is this what we talk about, enhanced practical cooperation? And I suppose that is my problem, in that you've never seemed to refuse any type of military activity whatsoever, and it does seem to be the case that NATO are gearing up its aggression against Russia, for example. Is this what we want, some form of conflict? Will Ireland be going along with the EU's new global security strategy? Does the Minister, for example, agree with the statement that the strategy that soft power is no longer enough? Is this the direction we're going on? And I suppose what my question is are we really sleepwalking, despite our protestations, into a situation of becoming a kind of a minor power in a NATO evolution across the EU?
Minister, 1 minute.
Find out has Ireland any plans to join NATO. I can assure you that Ireland has no plans to join NATO, and actually Ireland's cooperation with NATO will continue to be conducted through the Partnership for Peace. And this has been, there has been no change in the policy in relation to Ireland's engagement in NATO, or indeed our policy for deploying troops to NATO-led missions, which requires that the mission be UN mandated and Government and Dáil approval, as you well aware. The Government's 2015 review of foreign policy and defence white paper confirmed that Ireland will continue to maintain a policy of military neutrality, which is characterised by non-membership of military alliances and non-participation in common or mutual defence arrangements. And just let me highlight the only relationship that we have with NATO is through Partnership for Peace, which was launched in January 1994 as a means of outreach to new democracies in Central and Eastern Europe, and as a way to promote stability and strengthen relationships through the promotion of practical cooperation. And Partnership for Peace, since Ireland joined by both states who wish to become NATO members and by states that they do not, including the neutral or non-aligned states of Finland, Sweden, Austria or Switzerland. And in conclusion, Cathaoirleach, Ireland became a member of the PFP and its political counterpart for the Euro-Atlantic Partnership Council in December 1999.
Final question, Deputy Daly.
A large number of refugees are a consequence of the war efforts of imperial powers, and to date the reality is that our neutrality hasn't stood in the way of Ireland's participation in the ever-increasing militarisation of Europe. I mean, you haven't commented on the fact that we had a NATO warship openly engaged in activity and refuelling in Cork Harbour last weekend with Dutch military personnel on board. And it's a real Irish solution to an Irish problem that we say that we're neutral, yet at the same time we don't stand in the way of the massive amounts of military aircraft that go through our so-called civilian aircraft on the way to perhaps refuelling aircraft in Saudi Arabia, to decimate people in Yemen or to destabilise the Middle East or whatever. And I mean, the Minister can say we're neutral, but the reality is that everything we've done has been done to facilitate NATO. And I suppose what I would like to know is, are we going to be going along with the EU's new global security strategy? What practically does this mean for us? Because we do have a strategic link with these countries.
1 minute.
First of all, let me refute something you stated, that whatever NATO wants, NATO gets. I can absolutely assure you that is not the case. Whatever NATO wants, NATO gets. And just let me state to you that, and I don't want, I think it would be wrong of me or any member of this House to use our policy of neutrality and to throw around in very loose terms. That any decision that we make as a government, or any decision that any government has made in this House previously, our policy of neutrality is absolutely of utmost importance to any decision-making process that we make, and we never went beyond our neutrality, and it is very much debated in this House, and it's given everyone an opportunity to participate in any debate on our neutrality here in this House.